All right, let's just dive right into a seriously fascinating historical and linguistic puzzle today. We are looking at a famous story from the Quran, specifically chapter 20, where Moses goes up the mountain, and while he's gone, the Israelites are somehow convinced to build and worship a golden calf. Now, the text points the finger at a figure called Al-Samari. In this explainer, we're going to utilize our source material to unpack the evidence surrounding this specific word. We're treating it almost like a forensic linguistic investigation to see exactly how the source builds an airtight case against what's known as the Egyptian Schirmer theory. That's a specific claim frequently used by modern Muslim apologists to try and resolve an uncomfortable issue in this text. So here's the core of the issue we're dealing with. In plain Arabic, a Samiri literally translates to the Samaritan. But historically speaking, the Samaritan people didn't even form as a distinct recognizable group until many, many centuries after Moses would have lived. So we have a character building the golden calf during the time of the Exodus, carrying the name of a demographic group that simply did not exist yet. To get to the bottom of this mystery, our explainer is going to map out the mystery itself, an outdated dictionary defense, the missing vowels problem, conflicting timelines, a lost transmission path, and finally, coincidences versus real evidence. Section 1, the golden calf mystery. Let's look at the anachronism and the proposed alibi. To really grasp this proposed alibi, we first need to understand the timing issue. And I absolutely love this analogy from the source material. It perfectly captures what a historical anachronism feels like when you're reading a text. Think about it. If you're reading a historical account of George Washington, and suddenly it mentions someone checking their text messages, it completely stops you in your tracks, right? This glaring chronological mismatch is exactly what scholars are seeing when they look at the word Asamdi in this context. So, to fix this timeline glitch, some folks push an argument that we'll call the Egyptian Shimmer defense. The claim goes like this. The text isn't actually talking about a literal Samaritan. Instead, they argue the word comes from ancient Egyptian, where a word sounding kind of like shimmer meant stranger or foreigner. Under this theory, the Israelites were just using an old Egyptian nickname for an outsider. It sounds pretty plausible on the surface, doesn't it? Well, let's see what happens when the source puts this claim under the microscope. Section 2, an outdated dictionary defense. We need to evaluate the actual source of this claim. What's crazy is that the source material traces this whole foreigner translation back to a highly problematic origin. It all comes from a dictionary published way back in 1920 by Sir E. A. Wallace Budge. Now, Budge was famous back in the day, sure, but he stubbornly refused to accept newer, much better rules for reading Egyptian grammar. Because of this, modern Egyptologists consider his dictionary to be flat out wrong. Professors today literally warn their students not to use it. The trusted modern standards are actually the German Wörterbuch and the Thesaurus Lingua Egyptia. The source makes a really critical point here. If your key word only exists in a widely rejected 1920s book and is entirely missing from modern trusted databases, it was almost certainly just a misreading in the first place. Section 3, the missing vowels problem. Visualizing the invisible. Okay, this brings us to probably the strongest linguistic objection raised by our source. It has to do with how ancient Egyptian was actually written. See, hieroglyphs recorded consonants only, 0 vowels, none. It's exactly like writing the English word stranger as just strngr. Because modern scholars can't exactly pronounce a random string of consonants in a classroom setting, they invented a handy little shortcut. They just insert a short sound between the letters. And guess what? That is the entire origin of the word shimmer. The actual ancient evidence is just 3 consonants, esh, m, r. Those sounds, they're literally just a modern teaching habit. And this perfectly illustrates why this is such a massive, glaring problem for the theory. Look at the Arabic word we are trying to explain here, Samiri. It has very specific vowels baked into it, a long a short e, a long e. The ancient Egyptian word contributes absolutely nothing to explain these specific vowels because, as we just established, it has no vowels to give. The resemblance between the two is completely superficial. Section 4. Conflicting timelines and meanings. The Egyptianized Hebrew contradiction. Let's look at the next piece of forensic evidence. Sometimes this argument pivots and tries to claim the word is actually an Egyptianized Hebrew word. But actually, scratch that. You have to pick one because they mean totally different things. In Hebrew, the root shin mem rish means to guard or to watch. Think of the word shomer. But Budge's Egyptian word supposedly means stranger. So if it's a Hebrew word, it means guard, not foreigner. If it's the Egyptian word for foreigner, it's definitely not Hebrew. The argument is attempting to hold 2 completely incompatible claims at the exact same time just because they happen to share 3 consonants. Plus, there is a glaring timeline issue here. The source highlights a massive 2,000-year dating gap. Ancient Egyptian writing dates all the way back to roughly 3200 BCE. Hebrew, on the other hand, doesn't even emerge as a distinct language until around 1200 to 1000 BCE. So if Bud's word really is early Egyptian, it existed roughly 2 millennia before Hebrew even did. It is chronologically impossible for it to just be a borrowed Hebrew term. Section 5. The Lost Transmission Path. Let's talk about the silence in the historical record. Here's a huge question. If a dead ancient Egyptian word somehow survived to reach 7th century Arabia, shouldn't we see some evidence of its journey? But we don't. It's not in Coptic, it's not in pre-Islamic poetry, and it's totally absent from early Arabic dictionaries. Instead, what we do have are the strict rules of Arabic grammar. Arabic uses what's called a nisba ending, that final E sound, to specifically mark group belonging. So Misr becomes al-Misri, meaning the Egyptian. Samira becomes a Samiri, the Samaritan. So the crucial takeaway here is if you swap in foreigner for the root word, the grammar literally forces it to mean the foreigner-ite. That's just total gibberish in any language. The grammar itself points directly to group membership, not just a generic adjective. And honestly, the silence from the historical record is deafening. Think about the great early native Arabic commentators, brilliant historical minds like Al-Tabari and Ibn Kathir. They exhaustively debated this text. They made a habit of listing every single known interpretation, even the ones they personally thought were ridiculous. Yet, despite being closer in time to the text by 1,000 years and being natively fluent in the language, not a single one of them ever suggested this word meant an Egyptian foreigner. Section 6. Coincidences versus real evidence. It is time for the final verdict. Our source manages to pull all this forensic evidence together with a really fascinating behavioral clue located right in the text itself. In verse 97, Moses punishes this calf builder by decreeing he must go through the rest of his life saying la misasa, which means no touching. Now, historians know for a fact that real-world Samaritans had incredibly strict ritual purity rules regarding physical contact with outsiders. So if al-Samri means the Samaritan, this punishment of no touching is a brilliant, highly specific reference to actual Samaritan practices. But if the word just means a generic foreign guy, the no touching punishment becomes completely, utterly random. Ultimately, the whole Egyptian shamer argument falls into a classic linguistic trap, assuming that matching letters means matching history. Semitic languages build their words from a limited pool of 3 consonant roots. Coincidental matches aren't just possible, they are mathematically guaranteed to happen. Just look at English and German for a second. In English, a gift is a lovely present, but in German, gift means poison. Same exact letters, totally unrelated meanings. Matching consonants absolutely do not guarantee a shared history. So, how does our source wrap this all up into an airtight case? By outlining the 4 strict evidentiary standards that actual linguists require to definitively prove a word was borrowed from another language. You need a valid citation in a standard modern dictionary, evidence of the word's survival in Coptic, Arabic attestation near the era, and a logical explanation for the vowels in the grammar. The Egyptian Shemer argument, it fails every single one of these standard tests. Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative question for this explainer today. If the goal of the text was simply to say the foreigner, perfectly good Arabic words already existed to do just that, like al-gharib. Why on earth would a text communicating to an Arabic audience ever use an undecodable dead language code filtered through Hebrew when we have literal centuries of written proof that Arabic speakers plainly understood a Samiri to mean Samaritan? We just cannot abandon rigorous academic standards to solve an uncomfortable historical puzzle. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.